Now, Ethiopia's parliament has voted for an early end to a 6-month state of emergency, effective immediately. This is adding to signs that a bloody conflict between government and Tigrayan forces could be easing.
Ethiopia Parliament's decision to lift the state of emergency came 3 weeks after cabinet approval. Ethiopia imposed the order in November after Tigrayan forces threatened to march on the capital. The war in Africa's second-largest nation has largely grounded to a stalemate. Diplomats helping to mediate between the two sides are cautiously optimistic that progress towards peace is being made. The state of emergency gave the government power to detain citizens without charge and search homes without warrant. But a government offensive in December pushed Tigrayans back, although fights continues in the region of Afar and Tigray, where millions depend on food aid, remains cut off, with no food arriving since mid-December.
Well, for more on this, we're now joined by African security and policy expert Abdullahi Boru Halakhe. Thank you so much for joining. It's always good to talk to you.
My pleasure, my friend.
All right, so the lifting of a state of emergency, is that Addis feeling victorious that they managed the situation and that they feel that it's under control?
It could be, but I think what might have triggered this is, the barrage of, diplomatic and political efforts that has been, ongoing for the last few months but intensified over the last few weeks, that has seen, at least a glimmer of hope that this grinding conflict will probably find a political or diplomatic solution. The United States Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa is in the region. Kenya has been playing a significant role behind the scene. The AU Envoy for the Horn of Africa, the retired president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo. All this effort, I think, is moving in the same direction, and potentially these are the first salvos for that kind of diplomatic effort. But then again, we've been here before. I think at this stage, managing expectation would be critical.
So what does it mean to lift the state of emergency? What would the authorities been able to do under emergency powers?
Yeah, they've been able to detain so many politicians. They've been able to, almost blockade, any entry and exit from that region, including, humanitarian assistance. So I think what we are going to see in the next few days and weeks ahead is some of the politicians that have been arrested under this order, not just from the Tigray region, but also from other regions, would be potentially released. And we will also witness, the tampering down of the rhetoric from the central government and their supporters, as well as, some movement towards the political discussions. That is not something that can be guaranteed because it will most likely be an outcome. The easing of this would probably be the first step towards seeing, what, a lot of people who wish Ethiopia, nothing but good things would want to see. But that we know very well that that step is not going to be automatic. It has to be calibrated over a long period of time, a lot of the time with failures rather than successes. But at this stage, the easing is the first step.
All right, so what does this mean for the federal forces and the current offensive, which we've seen in recent days, using drones and other force in the Tigray area?
Yeah, we will most likely see that will be intermittent. I don't foresee it being stopped completely for the simple reason that, at the very minimum, what this administration wants is, even if there will be a negotiation, which I think would be, it might not be very soon, but it is in the works. What I would foresee is for the administration to continue using or deploying the drones particularly, because were it not for the drones, I think we'll be having a completely different discussions. But that would give them, even if they are going to the negotiating table, to go to the negotiating table from the point of strength rather than weaknesses. So they will negotiate on their own terms, not necessarily a term that will be forced on them. For the Tigray region, that is completely opposite. So it will be very interesting to see on what terms they will agree to sit down with the government. The easing of the state of emergency and potentially the relief that will come as a result in the humanitarian space will no doubt, make the community, that is the Tigray people, feel, at the very minimum, they're beginning to see the end of what has been an incredibly catastrophic war for them. For the Tigray political elite, if their people are feeding, then they will be able to engage in a meaningful dialogue from their own. At least if their people are not being fed, they are being surrounded from all directions and they do not have access to humanitarian aid, that must be incredibly difficult for them to go and negotiate with the Ethiopian federal government.
So what does this mean then? Does that mean that the TPLF are walking back from the Tigrayan cause and re-assimilating into the federal project?
It will be very difficult because, we've had this conversation. These two people, that is the Ethiopian federal government in Addis Ababa and the TPLF in the Western Tigray, have a completely different vision for Ethiopia. For the Prime Minister and people who support him, Ethiopia needs to go back to a centralized state. But for the TPLF and many other groups in Ethiopia, the genie is out of the bottle. The 1995 constitution allows for multi-ethnic federalism. You cannot bring that back in. So this diametrically opposed vision will clash, no doubt. But I think something has to be found. That is not to say that the multi-ethnic federalism did not have its problem, but at the very minimum, it has changed the configuration of the state of Ethiopia. It has acted as a pressure valve for this period of time, the 27 years. And so the idea that most of this community will go back to the imperial era where Ethiopia, the Amhara culture would be the national culture, the Amhara food, the Amhara language, that is gone. So I think the federal government needs to be disabused of that notion. To the Tigrayan, particularly the elite, they need to realize that their rule for over 27 years, while they might not see it that way, it has galvanized people, particularly the Amharas who are living in the urban areas. And so they need to rethink. But my sense is the federal project, the centralized federal project cannot stand because it has only worked for a very small minority. But the multi-ethnic federal project, whether the people who do not support it call it, it leads to division and everything, is here to stay. Will it be in its current form? I cannot guarantee that.
Parliament voted for the lifting of this state of emergency. Who's sitting in Parliament? Is there any representation from Tigray?
No, they refused. Because when the elections were held, that was last year, the Tigray people held their election on the constitutional timeline. Their elections were held, they elected their representatives. Prime Minister Abiy postponed the elections under the guise of COVID. And the Tigray representative did not sit in that parliament. They do not sit in that parliament. So there is nobody who is going to, at least in the parliament, negotiate and speak for the Tigray people. And that is why it's very important. Despite it being lifted, the next step, if the Tigray people or their representatives have to be engaged, it has to be through them. And that is why I keep on coming back to 3 or 4 points in terms of, going forward in an iterative way. Number one, there has to be a ceasefire that will allow, number two, for us to have humanitarian aid being distributed by aid agencies. And then number three, these two sides, Ethiopian federal government and the Tigrayans have to accept, all right? There has to be a mutual recognition from the Tigray that the current administration in Addis is the federal administration. Whether they participated in that election or not is a moot point. And for Ethiopian federal government to recognize the current Tigray representative, whether they participated in an election before the federal election were held, that is immaterial. And the fourth, and that would be, those are some of the things that would be sorted out once negotiation starts, is the question of accountability. There has been egregious human rights violation on a huge scale that has been committed by both the federal government and their supporters, including troops from Eritrea and militias from the Amara region, as well as the Tigrayan representative, that is the TDF. Amnesty released a report today that catalogs a litany of egregious human rights violations committed by the TDF forces. So I think that is probably will come towards the latter end, and the terms and the tenor and the period and what form of commission, what form of justice will be determined when these two sides sit at the negotiation table.
All right, and we certainly hope that they do sit at the table. Let's hope that this doesn't get scuppered. Abdullahi, your insights greatly appreciated as always. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, my brother Peter. Take care.